The invasion was over. The war was over. The last human cities had fallen. Their defenses lay in ruins. Their fleets had been obliterated. The mighty Drakthal Empire stood victorious. Their warlords gazed down upon the burning remnants of Earth, their crimson war banners fluttering over the ruined cities. The final battle had ended with a whimper. The humans had fought desperately, but in the end, they had been no match for the overwhelming might of the Drakthal fleet. Earth, the last stronghold of humanity, was now a conquered world. And with it, the human species was finished. The Drakthal broadcast their victory across the stars. They mocked humanity's final moments. They celebrated their destruction. They called it the end of the human war, but they were wrong, because something was still out there, something that should have been dead, something that should have never returned. And on the third night after their conquest, as the Drakthal warlords stood upon the ashes of a ruined Earth, a signal appeared, a single distress beacon coming from deep within the Sol system. At first they ignored it. A glitch, a malfunction, nothing more, until the signal grew stronger, until it hijacked their entire communication network, until the words appeared on every Drakthal ship, on every screen, on every planet. A message, a warning, a voice, cold, human, and filled with something worse than rage. The war isn't over. Not yet. The Drakthal command centers erupted into chaos. What is this? Where is it coming from? All human fleets were destroyed. This is impossible. But it was not impossible, because at the edge of the system, beyond the debris of lost battles and the wreckage of fallen fleets, something was moving. Something was coming. A warship, a human warship. One they had destroyed months ago. One that should not exist. And yet, there it was, emerging from the darkness, waiting. The Drakthal laughed at first. What could one warship do against their entire empire? But then, their scanners failed, their systems shut down, their warships froze in place, and the human warship's engines roared to life. The Drakthal stopped laughing, because humanity had returned, and this war was far from over. The Drakthal Empire had spent years waging war against humanity. It had begun as a simple campaign, another empire to crush, another species to dominate. They had conquered countless civilizations before. And humanity? They were nothing special. They lacked the vast numbers of the Hive Lords. They lacked the war-forged brutality of the Vorktan. They lacked the advanced weaponry of the Eldari Dominion. The Drakthal saw them as weak, until they learned the truth, until they realized that humans did not surrender, until they saw firsthand what happens when you try to erase them. The longest war. The war should have been over in weeks. The Drakthal arrived in force, entire armadas, world-killer weapons, planet-burning warships, and yet humanity refused to fall. Every city became a fortress. Every world became a battleground. Every loss made them stronger. The Drakthal crushed Mars, and humanity fled to Europa. They crushed Europa, and humanity retreated to Titan. They crushed Titan, and humanity vanished into the blackness of space. Every time the Drakthal believed they had won, humanity reappeared, stronger, faster, deadlier. They adapted, they learned, they turned the very weapons of the Drakthal against them. What should have been a swift campaign had turned into a nightmare, and the Drakthal began to fear them. The final battle for Earth. The Drakthal grew desperate. They knew humanity would never stop fighting. So they decided to end it once and for all. They gathered their entire war fleet, thousands of warships, millions of soldiers. A fleet so large, it blocked out the stars. They came to Earth, and the final battle began. Humanity fought like demons. They launched everything they had. Their fleets were outnumbered 10-1. And yet they tore through the enemy ranks with a fury the Drak-Thal had never seen before. Every last ship, every last soldier, every last citizen fighting to the bitter end. But in the end, even humanity's rage was not enough. Earth's defenses collapsed. The last human warships fell silent. The final transmission from the United Earth Fleet was simple. We fought, we lost, but we are not finished. The Drak-Thal laughed as they burned the last cities to the ground. They declared victory. They erased humanity's name from the records. And the galaxy moved on. The fatal mistake. The Drak-Thal had won. They had wiped humanity from existence. Or, so they believed. Because they had made one fatal mistake. They assumed humanity was finished. They believed that once their worlds were burned, once their fleets were shattered, once their people were gone, that humanity would die, that humanity would fade into history. They didn't understand. You don't win a war against humanity. Not like that. Not by killing them. Because when you take everything from a human, when you push them to the edge, when you leave them with nothing but rage and a reason to fight, that's when they become something else entirely. Something far worse than the enemy you first faced. Something that does not fear death. Something that will not stop until the war is truly over. And 3 days later, when the signal appeared, the Drak-Thal finally understood. The war was not over. Not even close. And now, they were the ones being hunted. For 3 days, the Drak-Thal Empire celebrated their victory. They broadcasted their triumph across the stars. They sent messages to other empires, warning them that this was the fate of those who resisted the Drak-Thal. Earth was ashes. Humanity was extinct. The war was over, until the signal appeared. It was faint at first. A simple distress beacon, weak, barely detectable, coming from the outer edges of the Sol system. A glitch, most likely. A malfunction from a destroyed satellite or a drifting wreck. The Drak-Thal ignored it, until it grew stronger, until it hijacked their communications network, until it appeared on every warship's system, overriding every security measure. Until the words burned onto their screens across every fleet, across every world. A message, a warning, a voice, calm, human, and filled with something worse than rage. The war isn't over. A pause. Not yet. The investigators never returned. The Drak-Thal. Command Council panicked. How is this possible? No human network survived the invasion. Find the source, shut it down. They dispatched a fleet. Not just a scouting patrol. A full battle squadron. 24 warships, some of the strongest in the Drak-Thal fleet, capable of reducing entire planets to rubble. Their mission? Locate the source of the signal and destroy it. It was supposed to be routine. But they never returned. Not a single distress call. Not a single escape pod. Just silence. And then, a new signal appeared. Another message. This time, the Drak-Thal could hear breathing in the background, slow, controlled, and then the voice returned. You should have killed us all. The warship that shouldn't exist. The Drak-Thal didn't believe in ghosts. They believed in firepower. They believed in domination. And yet, they were afraid. For the first time, they were afraid. Because when their next fleet arrived to investigate, they saw it. A human warship, floating in the darkness, alone, scarred, impossible. They had destroyed this ship months ago. They had watched it burn. And yet, here it was, waiting, And the moment the Drakthal fleet locked weapons on it, everything changed. The moment everything went wrong. The Drakthal commanders didn't hesitate. This was impossible, but it didn't matter. They gave the order to fire. Every warship unleashed its full firepower. Missiles, plasma cannons, fusion torpedoes. Storm of energy capable of wiping out an entire fleet. The attack hit, and then vanished. No explosion, no impact, nothing. The Drakthal warship systems flickered, weapons shut down, engines died, communications cut out. The Drakthal froze, in fear. They had faced countless enemies before, but never something like this. Then on every screen, across every ship, another message appeared. The last words the Drakthal fleet would ever see. You thought you had won. A pause. But we were only waiting. Then their warships began disappearing, one by one. No explosions, no wreckage. Just gone. And the Drakthal, for the first time in their history, knew what it meant to be hunted, the warship that shouldn't exist. For the first time in Drakthal history, a warfleet had disappeared without a trace. No wreckage, no distress calls, no survivors, only a single message remained. A warning, a human voice, calm, emotionless. You thought you had won, but we were only waiting. The Drakthal could no longer ignore it. This was no glitch, no malfunction, no rogue survivors. Something was out there, something they had not prepared for, and it was coming for them. The search for the Phantom warship. The Supreme War Council of the Drakthal convened in a state of emergency. The last fleet never returned. Our scanners detect no anomalies. Our ships are vanishing into nothing. This is impossible. But impossible had already happened. So they made a decision. They would send a grand warfleet, not just a battle squadron, not just an armada, a full-scale extermination force, the largest fleet ever assembled, their finest warships, their deadliest weapons, their most ruthless commanders. If humanity still existed, if this ghost warship was real, they would end it. This time, for good. The encounter. The Drakthal Grand Warfleet arrived at the edge of Sol System. Thousands of warships, weapons primed for annihilation. Battle formations flawless. They prepared for invasion. But there was nothing. No human fleet. No planets. Still standing. No sign of resistance, only a single warship. The same warship that should have been destroyed months ago. Drifting. Silent. Waiting. The Revenant. That's what the humans had called it. A name that no longer felt like legend, but prophecy. Warship that refused to die. A warship that had stared into the abyss. And come back changed, and then the nightmare began. The Grand Warfleet fires. The Drakthal did not hesitate. This time, they would not take chances. They unleashed hell. Every weapon, every missile, every cannon, a storm of destruction, enough to vaporize a planet, and then nothing. The weapons vanished before impact. The energy beams dispersed into empty space. Their scanners failed. Their shields flickered and collapsed. Their communications cut out, and then the Revenant moved. It did not accelerate. It did not burn thrusters. It simply was. One moment, it was drifting. The next, it was in the middle of the fleet, and the killing began. The horror of the Revenant. The Drakthal had fought in wars for centuries. They had seen battles. They had seen planetary exterminations. They had wiped out civilizations before. But they had never seen anything like this. The Revenant did not fire weapons. It did not use missiles or railguns. Instead, It unmade them. One by one. Drakthal warships disappeared, not destroyed, not shattered, just gone, as if they had never existed. The Drakthal panicked. Warships tried to retreat. Their engines failed. They tried to communicate. Their signals vanished. Then, across every remaining ship, a final message appeared. A human voice. Cold. Absolute. You should have left us alone. The massacre what followed was not war. It was annihilation. Drakthal warships blinked out of existence one by one. No debris, no explosions, just silence. And in that silence, the Drakthal finally understood. This was not revenge. This was judgment, and the sentence had already been passed. The last words of the fleet commander, the Supreme War Admiral of the Drakthal, leader of the greatest fleet in history, stared at his final moments. His fleet was gone. His empire was next. And for the first time in his life, he felt fear. Not fear of death, but fear of what they had awakened. The humans had changed. They had become something else. Something beyond war. Something that did not forgive. Something that did not forget. And as the Revenant turned toward the heart of the Drakthal Empire, he realized the real war was just beginning. The Drakthal Grand War Fleet was gone, erased. Not defeated, not broken, erased. And now, the Revenant turned its attention to the rest of the Drakthal Empire. Because the war was not over. It was only beginning. The panic spreads. The Supreme War Council received the news in silence. The most powerful fleet in history, their greatest commanders, their strongest ships, all gone, vanished without a trace. At first they refused to believe it. It's impossible. There must have been a malfunction. There is no way a single warship did this. But they all saw the same thing. The recordings, the transmissions, the warships disappearing, one by one. And now the Revenant was moving, heading straight for the core of the Empire. The final defense line. The Drakthal had one last chance. They had spent centuries building their empire. Their core worlds were protected by layered planetary defenses, Titan-class battle stations, orbital railguns that could split moons in half, doomsday weapons capable of wiping out entire fleets. This had to stop the Revenant. It was impossible for a single warship to break through, so they waited, they prepared. And when the Revenant finally entered the system, they fired everything, the doomsday barrage. The greatest weapons of the Drakthal Empire fired at once. Planetary defenses, orbital cannons, fleets stationed on every moon and station. Everything was unleashed. A storm of destruction roared toward the Revenant. Enough firepower to burn an entire solar system. Enough energy to tear apart a star. Nothing could survive this. Nothing. But then, it happened again. The weapons vanished. The missiles, the energy beams, the torpedoes. All of it, gone, as if they had never been fired at all. And then, the Revenant responded, the fall of the core worlds. The Revenant did not fire weapons. It did not launch missiles. It did not engage in traditional combat. It simply kept moving. And as it moved, the defenses failed. The planetary shields collapsed. The orbital stations shut down. The warships vanished one by one. There was nothing they could do. And then, on every screen, across every Drakthal world, the final warning appeared. A voice. Human. Cold. Absolute. You thought this was war. A pause. It isn't. Another pause. It's justice. And then, the Revenant descended, and the homeworld of the Drakthal Empire fell silent. The death of an empire, it took less than an hour. The mightiest civilization in the galaxy, gone. No ruins. No remains. No survivors. Only silence. And the galaxy watched in horror, because they had all seen it happen. The once unstoppable Drakthal Empire had been erased, not by an army, not by an invasion, by a single warship, a warship that had once belonged to a species they had tried to destroy, and now across every remaining empire, every species that had once mocked humanity, there was only one thought. If this could happen to the Drakthal, then who would be next? The last transmission. The Revenant did not stay, it did not conquer, it did not claim territory. Instead, it sent one final message, broadcasted across the galaxy. You started this war. A pause. You thought you had won. Another pause. You were wrong. And then, the Revenant vanished. Gone. Nowhere to be found. And the galaxy was left with only one lesson. War has a price. And humanity had just collected. The Drakthal Empire was gone, not defeated, not conquered, erased. Their fleets, vanished, their homeworld, silent, their colonies, uninhabited ruins. The galaxy watched in horror. The once mighty rulers, the conquerors who had feared nothing, had been reduced to nothing. And the worst part? No one knew how it happened. The fear spreads in the days that followed. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the Revenant wasn't human anymore. Some said it was a ghost ship, a vengeful spirit haunting the void. Some whispered that humanity had become something else. Something beyond life, beyond war, beyond understanding. But one truth remained. The war had ended, and humanity had not just survived. They had changed the balance of the galaxy forever. The missing fleets. Then, the disappearances began. It started with small patrols, warships that never returned. Then entire fleets went silent. No distress signals, no wreckage, no survivors, just nothing. Governments panicked. The great empires of the galaxy scrambled for answers. What was happening? Who was next? Was the Revenant still out there? No one knew. No one wanted to find out. The abandoned planets. Within weeks, entire Drakthal controlled. Star systems were abandoned. Merchants refused to travel through them. Trade routes were rerouted. Even pirates avoided them, because ships that entered those dead systems never came back. Not destroyed, not looted, not hijacked, just gone. The galaxy was too afraid to investigate because what if they found something? What if they were next? The silent watchers in secret. Some factions tried to search for the Revenant. They sent stealth probes. They used cloaked scouts. They tried to trace the disappearances. They failed, because the Revenant was never found. But, sometimes late at night on the edges of dead star systems, pilots swore they saw something. A shadow, a flicker in the void, a shape that wasn't supposed to be there. And when they tried to scan it, their systems shut down. Then, a message would appear, a human voice, cold, steady, final. You should have left us alone. And then the ships would vanish. The new order, the galaxy would never be the same. No empire dared to claim the old Drakthal territory. No fleets patrolled those stars. No conquerors rose to take their place. Because the fear remained. Fear that the Revenant was still out there. Fear that humanity was watching. Fear that if they ever tried to start another war, the same fate would come for them. Because war had a price. And now the galaxy knew exactly what that price was. The final warning decades passed. The story of the Revenant became legend. The younger species doubted it had ever existed. They called it a myth, a ghost story, a warning tale for ambitious warlords. But the older species, the ones who had seen the war, they never forgot. Because sometimes in the depths of space, on the edges of uncharted systems, a distress signal would appear, weak, faint, barely detectable, and those who recognized it never answered, because they knew. It was not a call for help, it was a warning, and those who ignored it were never heard from again. The galaxy was silent. The war was over. The Drakthal were gone. And yet the fear remained, the fear that humanity was still out there, that the Revenant wasn't finished, that this was not the end, but a warning. And for those who still believed, they were untouchable. For those who thought they could rise where the Drakthal had fallen, they were about to learn the final lesson. The rise of the Khazar Dominion. The Khazar Dominion had watched the Drakthal fall. They had feared the Revenant, but after decades of silence, they believed the ghost ship was just a myth. Humanity was gone, the Revenant was gone, and the Khazar were ready to take the throne. They expanded, they conquered, they declared themselves the new rulers of the galaxy. They laughed at the stories of the Revenant. It was just a story, a lie to keep the lesser species in check. The Khazar feared no one, until the disappearances began. History repeats itself. At first, it was just a single warship, then a patrol fleet, then an entire colony. Gone. No wreckage, no distress calls, no explanation. The Khazar ignored it. They told themselves it was pirates, a rebellion, an enemy they could crush. But deep down, they knew. They had seen this before. They had seen what happened to the Drakthal. And now it was happening to them. The fleet assembles. The Khazar refused to bow to fear. They gathered their greatest war fleets. They sent out broadcasts across the stars. They declared war against the unseen enemy. If the Revenant is real, let it come. We are not the Drakthal, we will not fall. They fortified their worlds. They armed their fleets. They prepared for war. And then, the Revenant arrived. The final stand. The Khazar Grand Armada was the strongest force the galaxy had seen. It dwarfed even the Drakthal war fleets. Millions of soldiers. Thousands of warships. Weapons capable of ripping apart planets. This was their last stand. And yet, when the Revenant appeared, everything happened exactly the same way. The moment of horror. The Khazar fired first. Everything. Missiles, torpedoes, energy cannons, and just like before, nothing hit. Weapons vanished before impact. Their defenses shut down, their shields collapsed, and then their warships began disappearing, one by one. Their crews vanished without a trace. Their command centers went dark until only silence remained. The Khazar, Supreme Warlord, watched in terror. This wasn't war, this was inevitable. And as the last remaining Khazar fleet commander sent out a desperate message, the final transmission came through. A human voice, cold, absolute. You never learned. A pause. But this time, we are not leaving survivors. The end of the Khazar. The greatest Khazar war fleets were wiped from existence. Their homeworld never sent another signal. Their colonies were abandoned. And across the stars, every empire that had once sought power fell silent, because now the lesson was clear. This was not just revenge. This was not just justice. This was eradication, a final warning. And now, The galaxy knew there would be no next war, because if there ever was, the Revenant would return, and, this time, it would not leave until the stars themselves were empty. The galaxy was silent. The war was over, not just for humanity, not just for the Drakthal, not just for the Khazar, but for everyone. No empire dared to rise. No conqueror dared to expand. No fleet dared to march. Because the lesson was final. The Revenant was watching, and it was waiting. The legacy of the Revenant, the name faded from records. It became a ghost story, whispered warning among warlords, an unspoken law among generals. Do not start wars. Do not seek conquest. Do not awaken the past, because humanity remembers, because humanity waits. And if war comes again, so will they. The last transmission it came, decades later. A single broadcast across every channel. No source, no signal origin, no way to trace it, just words in the void. A human voice, cold, final. We were never the strongest. We were never the fastest. We were never the most powerful. A pause. But we survived. Another pause. And now, so will the galaxy. Silence. Then, the final words. Words that would haunt the stars forever. War has a price. Do not make us collect again. The end of the age of war, the broadcast ended, and no one dared to challenge it. The warlords stayed in their territories. The fleets stood down. The weapons rusted in silence. Because the stars still carried a shadow with no home, a shadow with no fleet, a shadow that was always there, waiting, watching. And if the galaxy ever forgot the price of war, if the galaxy ever tempted fate again, they knew what would happen. The Revenant would return. And this time, it would not leave until the stars themselves were empty.